There was a guy, they had a guy in some old professor from California, and if the guy takes it for, in other words, get a lump sum, he would make as much almost in a year as he would make it in 20 years, taking it in smaller chunks. Because see, he could take the lump sum and invest it, and then he could go spend a few million and still get about $80 a year.
Well, it's.
Holler whenever you get ready. I'm Jim Barkley. I went in the Navy in May of 1941. I was in Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941, whenever the Japanese attacked it. It was 7:58 a.m. on Sunday morning. I had just got up, had gone to the restroom, brushed my teeth. There was a big jar on the side of the ship. Someone hollered out and said, "Look where you're going, you SB." About that time, another big thud, a little bit louder, and I knew it wasn't a tug that hit us. I looked out the porthole and saw about 7 planes coming towards us. So I hollered that the Japanese are attacking us. I started running to my apartment to warn people what was happening. I got about halfway down the ship and I was ankle deep in water. There was a bomb dropped right in front of me and I dove behind this bulkhead. The bomb did not go off. While I was already down, I couldn't get back up without my feet sliding down from underneath me. So I used my hands on some our laundry deal that had little grooves in it and pulled myself to the high side of the ship, which was already lifted about 35 degrees. I got up the high side of the ship. It was men would get halfway off the hatch and somebody would grab it and pull him back down. They were just shuffling each other back like you do dominoes. No one was getting out. And I said to God, well, this is it. I'm gone. And I suppose he told me, he says, get the hell off of this ship, because I hit the gangway and what I didn't knock off, I knocked upside, and I and one other guy got off the ship. That was it. Okay, it was a guy right behind me named Craig. He was from Utah, and I told him, I said, let's jump, Craig. And I jumped, and he didn't jump. So I got in the water, and it was a guy out there hollering, I can't swim, I can't swim. And I said, you can swim, come on, you're on top of the water. So I started swimming, he outswam me and caught me. And kept dragging me under and dragging me under. Finally I got away from him. I got out to this key and was up on the key, and he had swum to the key, and he hollered for us to help him up. There's about 12 or 15 guys on this key, which is about a 10 to 10. I reached to grab him by the hand, and still he got me. He was about to pull me back in. No one would help me, and finally I hollered at him, if you guys don't help me pull him out of here, I'm going to get that rope and knock you all off of here, which is about a 3-inch rope. They didn't know it, but I could move. But they came over to help me pull him out. We got him out of the water, and about that time the Japs started strafing us on this key. So I dove in the water and swam ashore. We got up on land, and it was a guy up there handing out money. He had $5,000 he was going to give away, and he's handing everybody money. I got 50 cents from him. About that time, the Japs started strafing us again, and some lieutenant there told us to get in this trench and lay down and pull dirt over us. So I got in this trench and laid down, and before I could get dirt pulled over me, they started hitting pretty close to me. So I got up and ran to a big hangar up in there, Fort Island. We went into this hangar, and a bunch of guys saw me. It was about 200 of them come pouring in there. I'm sitting about 10 feet inside the door. I looked over and saw this guy by the name of Craig, again, from Utah, way over in the corner, and I motioned to him. I said, "Craig, come over here." And he was white as a sheet, because he had fell on the inside of the ship. It was floating on a 12 by 12 down the harbor the last time I saw him, right behind the tin can that sunk a submarine right in front of him. Anyway, he says, "You come over here." I got up and walked about 30 feet, and the bomb had hit right where I was sitting, right in the doorway, and here we all trapped in this hangar and can't get out. It seemed like, I don't know how long, probably 30 minutes or an hour, I really don't know how long. Some way or other they got a bulldozer over there and tore the door open so we could get out. There's a flatbed truck come along about the time I got out, and I outran it and jumped up on the back of it. And it was going to an ammunition depot in the Army way on the other side of town, and that's where I ended up at. Okay, then that night, they got us. It was about, well, I don't know how many of them, probably 200 of us, and carried us aboard this oil tanker. That's where we was going to spend the night. Well, we had two bombers that were supposed to come in, B-24s came in that night, and our own crew shot them down. And while they were shooting, one of the machine guns came through the side of this oil tanker we were on and killed a guy on my left. Shot a guy on my left through the left arm, ricocheted, the same bullet ricocheted off the wall and came back and killed a guy on my right. I could hear the thug, and he walked about 10 feet and fell flat on his face, and blood just pouring out of him. And I guess that's about it. After that, we were just running around, and later on we got assigned to whatever ship we wanted to go aboard. That's about it. Well, whenever I was sitting over this corner and watching all those people, and I decided I would never get off the ship, it was a Lieutenant Cunningham, which was my division officer, came up, and I was over watertight integrity. I was supposed to close all the doors up and keep them tight at all times, not unless they were in use, to keep the ship from sinking. In case one of my apartment got water in it, it wouldn't go into the other one. Well, Saturday night, before I could go on Liberty, I had orders from Lieutenant Cunningham to go close all those doors. I had 5 men with me. It took us about an hour, hour and a half to go close all the doors, check them on the ship, make sure they were watertight and locked. Opened up. We had to go and open them up because they was having an inspection and they wanted them to air out. So we went and opened up all the watertight doors, and I went on Liberty. Well, during the attack, whenever I'm sitting in this corner and I know I can't get off the ship, Lieutenant Cunningham says, "Get the men and let's go down and see if we can close some of the watertight doors and we can save this ship." I said, "Sir, we're in water up to our knees right now." I said, "This ship is sunk." I said, "You're crazy if you go down there." It was 2 or 3 men there that was in watertight, and I think it was just 2, and he took them and went to the next hatch and went down it, and that's the last time I saw him. He was killed on the ship. That it? Got orders that we were going to have an inspection on a Sunday morning, which has never happened in naval history. He had orders to do this, to open up all the doors so they could air up for an inspection on Sunday morning.
And what did you say about all the officers were somewhere?
Oh, and the Japanese had gave a party that night for the officers of the U.S. Navy, and 90% of them were at this party, getting drunk, really, if you want to get right down to it. And I imagine 99% of them had the keys to the ammunition compartments in their pocket. None of the gunners could get in there. They finally realized what was going on. They was looking for an officer with a key, and they couldn't find him because they wasn't aboard ship. So they had to take some kind of tool and break the locks to get into the ammunition, which probably took at least 15 minutes. And that's why we were kind of late on firing a lot of the planes.
Do you know how many survivors there were of the Utah?
No, I don't. It was, I think, about 500 on there, and it was 58 killed that was on the ship. I think it was about 107 killed altogether, so it was about 400 survivors. Because we didn't have very big a crew. See, we were an experimental ship. All the other battleships had 12, 15, 1,800 men on them, but we only had about 500 on this ship. But we had lumber stacked on there, 36 inches deep, because our plane used to come over and bomb us for practice, you know, practice bombing. We had that lumber on there so the little bomb, sitting there, bomb wouldn't go through the top of the ship and do any damage. And this lumber was floating down the canal after we were rolled over. Well, people say you rolled over. Really, we sunk to the bottom, and it couldn't sink any deeper, so it rolled. It had to roll because it had so much water on that one side. But if it hadn't been for that lumber, it would probably been a lot more damage because it was one bomb that dropped that went all the way through it. So you never know what the lumber might have done for it. But all of our guns had metal, had 3/4 inch metal built over like a dog house. They call them dog houses, where those bombs hit your gun, and it wouldn't do any damage to him. Had one kid, him and I were up on the bridge as machine gunners, and he ran all the way up there to his gun before he realized that it was covered up and he couldn't use it. And he's a priest now in San Diego, California. A Catholic priest in San Diego, California. He's never been to one of our meetings. But he said, I went all the way up there. You were trained, that's why you're trained to do something. You do it automatically without thinking. Without thinking, he went to man his gun to no avail.
17 degrees, and with all this fuel oil and stuff, it's slippery. So to keep these guys from sliding down into this pool of oil, well, we'd drape them around bunks and stanchions and etc. to keep them from going in there. And we finally got in communication with our sound-powered telephones to come give us some help because we couldn't get out. So they had to come from the outside and got those big wrenches on the doors and open them up. So this guy and I fell out of there and went aft and fell down and breathed deeply. And then they got these other guys out to put them out, but there was 2 of us conscious. And it was after that time that they said, well, abandon ship. Well, it didn't take me long to abandon ship. I went up and dived over and went on the beach. And I got over the beach, here was a Marine standing there, and he said, you off to California? I said, yeah. He said, well, you got to go back aboard, fight fire. And I said, not on your life. That thing was a fire fore and aft. I said, not on your life, I'm not going to go back aboard there. But he had a bayonet on the end of that rifle, and when he kind of lowered that thing about belly button wise, I said, wow. I said, how do you get back aboard that SOB? I'm a firefighting SOB. So I went back aboard, and all this stuff happened after I had been ashore and went back aboard, and that's when we started this rescue outfit, and all this happened a little later, hours later, maybe. But I was very grateful that I got off. I was grateful I got through the war. I had 2 ships sunk out from me, USS California, USS Chicago, and I had a ship very badly damaged and once on harbor in the Korean War. But I got through the whole thing and didn't even get a scratch. So
On the internet that he made out a long time ago, and he wrote all of his experiences down shortly after it happened, and they were fresh in his mind at that time. Now mine aren't that fresh, but there's a lot of things I do remember. But he does have a very, very detailed account of the whole sinking of Utah on the internet and the USS Utah's homepage.
Good, we'll get those.
Tell him about it.
Just tell your name.
Well, pardon me. I was, I said on the website, I was just reaching over my locker to get my shaving gear out and get ready to go on Liberty that morning. And when the first torpedo hit, must have been about 10 minutes, 10 or 5 minutes before 8. And the second one followed about, I'd say, a minute or so later. And the ship began to list heavily to port. And the radioman on watch, first class, said that he thought it was a collision. We didn't know what it was. But we soon decided we better get out of there. This compartment was about this second platform deck down. We went up a ladder, and they were strafing heavily. Ship was still listening faster, and when we finally made the way up and over the side, slid down the side, and there were a lot of barnacles there, and it scratched up a bit, and then went into the water from there, and swam the fort out. And the attack was still going on at the time, and there was so much action that it was hard to keep track of what was happening at the time. And then there was a second attack that followed, and they were still bombing and strafing as before, but they were more prepared for the second attack. And after that, pardon, in the evening, we went to the USS Argonne, and from then went to another ship. But most of this I have on the itemized on the website, the USS Utah, which Bill Hughes, another radioman, has compiled. And, that's about all of the attack that can summarize. And thank you for recording this.
That's great, Fred. During the attack, I'd just come up from near where Red was, the radio one deck below where he was, down at the generator room or the switch gear room, getting ready for the day, and went up to our mess deck to get dressed where my locker was. We didn't have a locker where we slept. We had it way up higher. And heard a lot of noise and looked out and saw an airplane coming toward us. And it struck me, why are they practicing bombing on Sunday morning in port? They don't do this. And that's what I thought was going on until I saw a torpedo fall off of the airplane. And as soon as it left the aircraft started climbing to miss the ship because he was just barely off the water. And that hard torpedo came at me, and of course the water exploded down, so I watched the wake of it as it neared the ship and felt when it hit and the explosion. And as the airplane pulled up to miss the mast, I knew what was going on real quick. Big red dots under each wing, which was it's a symbol, a well-known symbol, such as this flag out here. I yelled at the guys, and I was the only one near a porthole, and I yelled, "Hey, we're under attack. Let's get out." And about that time, we got hit again, and the ship shuddered and started listing right away. And I made my way up to a ladder, or could go up one flight of to the main deck, and by that time the ship was listing, and as the list made it real hard to crawl up a ladder. Surprisingly, well, it didn't surprise me, I guess. It's just a fact of gravity. And when I did get up to the main deck, I had to crawl and pull myself along to get on over to the starboard side, because where I exited, it was on the port side where they came in off of the Pearl City. When I got up to the air castle, which is probably this enclosed area, we got decks above, and then out is the main deck of the ship. And I remember Commander Isquith was up there, Lieutenant Commander, and he said, "We're going to have to abandon ship, put on a life jacket, everybody." And the ship was leaning, it was holding on the mooring lines, and it looked like it was going to hold. And I said, "Well, okay, I'll go get a life jacket in case those things break. It'll probably go." But when I looked over the side, and I decided right then that I wanted to swim underwater, because there was shrapnel coming down and machine gun strafing going on from the fighters that were coming down low. And I took a life jacket off because I figured the best bet was to swim underwater. And about the time I did that, the weight of the water in the ship got so heavy that those mooring lines, which were heavy hawsers, 3 or 4 inch rope, they parted. There was guys trying to crawl across them over to the ballards that we were tied up to, and they were flung into the air. I saw one guy flying back there, and at that time, of course, the ship started rolling right on over, and I got up on the well, where I could get on the side of the ship, and I just slid down, and like Red, I got scratched up a little bit. I went back first and hit the water, and very fortunately we didn't have too much oil on the water, and we didn't have any fire on the water. Some oil, but not real bad, like it was across the island, which I found out later. Ships were exploding and blowing up over there. All those battleships, the Arizona and the Oklahoma was sinking, and several of them were on fire. And I swam underwater to get over to the beach, and I got evidently into the same ditch that he did, and all of us did. For a little bit of a lull we had, and we went over to some housing area, and there was a lady over there, maybe you remember her, Red, that was helping people as they were coming off of the ships that were burning over on the other side of the island. They were burnt bad, oil all over them. I wasn't hurt bad, and most of us wasn't. I didn't have any clothing on because I just got out of bed and came up the top side to get dressed for the day. I had on a pair of underwear or skivvies, and that's it. And she said, the lady that was standing there at the quarters that were family housing quarters that were on the island said, just go on in and help yourself and get some clothes, and which I did. And I found a pair of pants and shears and a shirt and went out. And I remember vividly going out and seeing a guy come out with a tuxedo on. No shoes, but he had on a tuxedo. He was dressed. And that's a fact. From then, a lot of the stuff is real vague to me. I know I did go over, and we got on a motor launch and sometime during the day, and it's getting late, we went over to the 1010 dock where the Argonne was, and I was in the compartment when that machine gun shell come in there, and I did get out and get on a boat and spend the rest of the night, like I think you probably did. And we lived on a hillside up by the mess hall for 2 or 3 days before we really got organized and started getting assignments to other ships. And then I went on the Honolulu. I don't know where Red went.
I went to the USS Castor.
Okay. And we lived to fight the rest of the war. Where there was a shell that went right through the smokestack. There's a round hole in it. I can remember that, seems like, real well. It's quite neat.
It was.
How old were, how old?
I was 20 years old the morning of the attack. Coming up on 21, my birthday's February 23rd, so I was just about 21, not quite.
And you had been in how long?
Since September of 1939, and I went aboard the Utah in November of 1939, right out of boot camp, and I originally went in as a seaman and worked as a mess cook, and I finally got transferred into another mess job of the master at arms, feeding them. And this thing lasted about 3 months, and I got tired of mess cooking. That's peeling potatoes and cutting pineapples when we had them, and getting your mouth all raw from eating so much of it. And I told them that I'd had some electrical experience, and they said, well, good, we need some electrician strikers, so I was transferred down to E Division. And lo and behold, I had to mess cook for the E Division also. So the first 9 months I was there, I was washing pots and pans and taking grub or food down to the mess tables. We didn't have on the Utah a line where you go through and everybody gets what they want. We had tables that we had to set up, had plates and tableware and stuff. We had to bring all the food down to them and put it on the table. And then when they got through eating, we had to wash all of their dishes and all of their pots and pans. And so that went on for 9 months.
Warren, how old were you?
I was 22, turned 22 in October. I've been in, at that time, I think about 21 months. I applied for enlistment in 1939, and you'd think you were going to the academy, you had to have checks in your school, and every place you'd gone to school or lived, they really checked on your character at that time, because it wasn't too easy to get into the Navy. And I went through boot camp San Diego, through radio school, and then went out on a Navy tanker transportation to Pearl and went aboard the Utah out there. And the executive officer asked me if I had a choice to go on deck or in a signal gang. No openings in the radio gang. He knew I knew the code. And I told him I'd prefer to go on deck. He said, very well. So I spent about 2 or 3 months in the old 3rd Division. And then from there, when first opening of the radio gang I got, they used to go down at night and practice copying the old Fox sketch, which was a fleet broadcast. And we did a lot of drilling with the carriers. In fact, once we had some practice runs with a submarine south of Pearl, and operated with several of the carriers and the Marine air groups. It was quite an experience, so I always remember it. Thank you.
And he was at that time. He's not quite.
No, a little faded now.
One of the things I remember after Pearl Harbor was I was assigned to the USS Honolulu, and we were probably 3 or 4 weeks after I got on there. We were probably on the way to Melbourne with a convoy of more materials that were taken down there, and then when we got them there, we went into a battle line. But we got a message that to the commanding officer that wanted to inquire with me what films we had on board at the time of the sinking in Utah. And I was the motion picture operator, or one of them, on the Utah at that time. And that's the only thing I have in that area left is a copy of that message that came in on the radio. And I have it at my home, and it's blacked out, and it's signed by Commander Horace, who took over as the commander of Utah after the attack. And later on, I think he went to the California or one of the other battleships as commanding officer. Copyrighted. And we had the raw negative film of that. And they had to account for it because they were copyrighted. They were accountable.
Right. It was all about films.
Yeah.
He's got that anyway.
Okay.
Who you got?
Who?
Me?
George.
George Hedinger. On December the 7th, I was electrician mate 2nd class. I was down in, which before during the First World War was probably the plotting room, which we didn't have much going on down there now. They put in bunks down there, and that's where we slept from interior communication electricians. Anyhow, it was, I don't know what, I guess it was probably up for breakfast sometime. I think it was down there. And we heard some explosions. Well, I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe some ammunition exploded, or somebody dropped one of them armored hatches. But then one of the guys, named by Getz, he come down, he said the Japs were attacking. Well, our general alarm, there were big gongs here, and they had a single stroke. We go bong, bong, bong. It went about 3 or 4 times, and it quit. So then I was wondering, well, I wonder where I have to go to find the problem afterwards. And of course, that was my duty to work on it. If the diffusers were right around the corner there, just a little hatchway there and around there, so I put another fuse in. It went bong, bong, bong about 2 or 3 more times, and it quit. So I don't know, we was sitting there for a while. Anyhow, some way, word got passed that the abandoned ship, well, anyhow, I went up this central part there. Jack Basson, he was on the switchboard. He was just around the corner there. Of course, I thought he got the word, but anyhow, I got up on the top side there, and I was thinking about going to my locker, which was we was kind of heeled over quite a ways there, and I was looking down there where our lockers were, and I see either smoke or flour or powder or some kind anyhow. So I thought, well, I better not go down there, so I keep going up, and I get up there by where the captain's cabin there, and I started walking towards the high side, and I know there was at least one guy there. He was just standing there. When I got to the railing, the line had parted and it was hanging down the side of the ship. So I got a hold of that. Anyhow, I started going down, and going down, it seemed like I was getting any closer to the water. I think as I was going down, the ship was going over. And I hit my tailbone on the keel, and it was sore for quite a while. When I got in the water, boy, hands and feet were gone, and we swam over to, I don't know what you call it anyhow, where it was tied up. There was a concrete thing there. We a little way from the beach. It wasn't right on the beach there. So I got up on there, and I remember there was a piece of shrapnel come down. There was another guy there. And of course, they had big springs on there, and then the casting there, and the shrapnel hit that, and I remember it ricocheted off and hit one of the guys in the knee. And then there's another guy, he was in the water. He was in our division too, and he was hollering and he couldn't swim or something. So I didn't have any oil on me at that time, but I went back in to help him out, and then I got some oil on me. So anyhow, we were sit there for a while, and then a boat come along and he took us over to the shore. And they had a ditch there. I guess they were putting in sewers or something. It was just like a trench, you know. So we all get in there, and of course we were watching them shooting there. And when the Jap planes get hit, boy, of course the guys were out there yelling on. But the bachelor officers' quarters were pretty close there, and somehow somebody got a bottle of whiskey there, and they got there, and then they was passing it up and down the trench there, and they were pretty good that morning. So I don't know how long we was in there, and anyhow everything kind of quieted down, and then we go out a little ways there, and we help them putting shells in the belts for the machine gun. And we done that for a while, and I guess no more planes coming over. And then we started walking around there. We went walking out past the seaplane where the hangar there for the seaplanes. Of course, that was all burned out there. I don't know, it was for a while there. Some boat come along too, and they took us over to the Navy Yard. And they get us some folding cots, and it was called what I guess we called it the beer garden or something. They had a tin roof. It had a metal roof over the top of it. That's where we were going to sleep that night. And then they give us some mosquito netting too. And I looked at it and I seen a label on there, 1918. So we was there, and that night, the night come, and I don't know just how them planes come in. I guess they were ours, and somebody opened fire, and everything in the harbor opened fire. And you never seen the 4th of July like that. The tracers, you know. And then the shrapnel started falling down in this tin roof, and I was kind of worried, you know, like maybe a 5-inch or something did go off and come down through. It didn't happened. But I know it was some of the other guys mentioned they were down on the dock and they got sprayed with machine gun air. But of course, we found out next morning what happened there. We got, I think it was the vessel. I was talking to Jack Clark there, and he said that it was a vessel. I thought it was, but I didn't remember for sure. And as we were going in the chow line there was a hole through the side of the ship. And you look through that hole, and you look right through the superstructure of the California. So that's so. Yeah, the only thing I saved, I had a pen in my skivvy shirt, and then later on, of course, we got some clothes there. All I had was this white, it was shorts that we had to cut off, and my skivvy shirt, and that's all we had. And then when they got some clothes, I took them off and threw them away, and then kind of funny. Later on, I remembered I had two $1 bills in my pants pocket. Well, because money you couldn't buy nothing. You either got it for nothing or you couldn't get it. So. And then, of course, they give us some cards sent to our folks that we were okay.
Yeah, we were surprised a while ago when the men told us that sometime it took those cards 45 days.
It was over a month, I know, before they got it.
That just amazed me. Yeah, one of the men said it took 45 days before his folks got their card.
Some was longer than that.
Was it? That's tough.
Some of them never did get it.
Well, I've heard that.
Yeah, I guess that's about all I have to say now.
But your folks got your card, huh? After about 4
They got
years?
it sometime, I don't know when.
Yeah, it's just, how about yours? How long did it take yours, Strong?
They never did.
They never did get your card. Hmm.
I guess they started looking for me, trying to get word on it. And I got letters from them, answered them, and got answers from the letters that I sent them. And they, and then finally, his skipper called me up from the carpet. He got a telegram that I had to contact my folks. I don't know how long that was. I says, I says, I've got letters, answered the letters, and got answers from those letters. And you say that I haven't.
Huh. Well, start from the beginning. What do you remember?
Well,
Or where were you?
where was I? At the time, in the torpedo head, I was in the mess hall, in the third division mess deck. On the second deck, it was, and I was going back to take a shower to go on the beach. Yeah. During the week, I was secured in with a boat cruise. On the weekends, I was a duty driver. And so I was busy all the time. I didn't know if I was had any liberty or not, but I had 5 days of liberty every week. But anyway, I was getting ready to go over on the beach, trying to go and catch the first boat. But they passed the word that, well, all at once the ship just raised up, settled down. I looked at, I said, what the heck? then boatswain's passed to work to close all watertight doors and hatches. So, like a fool, I went back down in the compartment, living compartment, which was on the deck below, and started over to closing the hatches. We got to the hatch and looked down, and here was the water just gushing up at us. What the heck was that? So we started to leave, and the ship started tilting. Time we went to the distance of the compartment over to the ladder to go up. Water was already coming from the opposite, the port side, clear across into our compartment. And I don't know who the mess cook was, or the compartment cleaner was, but he was jumping up and down, hollering to get off his wet deck. And he went jumping, and he come down, he landed in that water. He looked down sort of surprised. The mop went one way and the bucket went the other. And so he started going up the ladder with the rest of us. The second division, which is on the port side, was coming over into our department. And all of us was going up the same ladder. Got up on the second deck, then the same deal going on up to the main deck. Got up there, had pretty good list on it. And just heard something hit the top of the hatch, and it was looked up as a Japanese plane coming over. It's running up the side of the ship there to going for higher ground. You always laugh at the people that you see a lot of these movies, they being chased by the police or somebody chased them. And first thing they do is start going up the ladder and go, "Now, hey, you get up here to the top floor, where are you going to go from there?" And I always laugh at that, but that's exactly what we done. A lot of them had gone over the other side, but that's where all the timber was falling into the water. And I wasn't going to have any of that. So I got a little over halfway up, my feet started sliding out from under me because of the steepness of the deck. And I made a lunge and just grabbed a hold of the lifelines and pulled myself on up through the lifelines to the side of the ship. Started walking on down toward the water line, or just walking the ship over. But my feet slipped out from under me when I hit below the water line on the wet bottoms, and I went into the water. When I come up and I looked up, there was a big old screw sitting right above me. I swam over to the Ballard, and then got into the boats, and onto the Ballard, just sitting there for a minute. They come back over, so I just dove in the water and started swimming for the beach. Got to about halfway over, there's a big cable running along. I grabbed a hold of that, holding on to it, and the guy was hollered he couldn't make it. So he got a hold of him, pulled him up. He had on these big old work shoes. We took them off of him, and then we swam on over to the beach, got into the ditch. And from there, went different places, finally got over on the beach. I don't remember how long, or anything. But they started looking for them because I had the keys to the vehicles. And the captain was looking for them. He wanted to start driving, so I got over on the beach. From then on, I stayed in that vehicle almost day and night because I had to wait on him, drive him here and wait, and drive him somewhere else and wait. That's the way it was. And all of a sudden, he come up, I don't know where he got it. Thompson machine gun, handed it to me. What are you supposed to do with that? But I had to take care of that thing for quite a while and finally got rid of it. But then on I went from that into the salvage cruise. And of course the skipper was in charge of salvage. And then when he was relieved, I started driving for this other captain. I stayed there for a while. But that was it. And this old skipper that took over was a Captain Wallet. I looked at him when I first see him. I said, well, what kind of joker is he? He started from Washington when it started. He got his orders for Pearl, for salvage. See, he started as lieutenant commander out of Washington. The time he got to California, he was a commander. No, he just got his commander's bars when he left that. All they done is give him a collar pins. And he didn't have time to buy a uniform. So he still had his lieutenant commander's hat on, with commander's bars on his shoulders. And the time he got to San Francisco, he was made a captain. So here he was with his lieutenant commander stripes on his jacket, captain's shoulder bars, and well, it's that lieutenant's hat on. That's what I made. That's the way he is dressed.
Hmm.
You remember that smell at Pearl Harbor?
Who?
You remember the smell?
Oh yeah.
It was kind of a sweet smell. I was wondering what it was. Like it
That
was
was-
burnt flesh or what?
No, some of it burnt flesh, but a lot of it was sugar cane burned.
Mhm.
I never had to go on a burial detail. I was glad of that.
Yeah, Jack went on barrel detail.
Then went aboard the Honolulu. There was a bomb that come, I guess, through the dock right alongside it and put a big dent in the side of it. It was aboard there, and then I guess they flooded the ammunition hold there right away, but when they started bringing that stuff out of there, you ought to see it all twisted up and bent up there. There's one that never went off there.
Hmm.
It was really bent up. Got the guys there from the Utah, we slept on top siding for a couple of weeks, I guess. We didn't want to go down
You
below.
don't want to go down below again. I bet that wasn't awful feeling being down there, not knowing if you're going to get up. Did y'all know
Well-
each other on the Utah?
Yeah,
Well, I didn't know if I knew it.
we didn't know each other.
No, you didn't know each other then.
He's in
It was a
the
different division, I was in.
he's in the black gang and I was in the deck gang.
Probably seen him around, but I didn't know.
Well, If you ever took the ship's vehicles on Liberty,
The only ship's vehicle was a boat.
well, you know when they had that panel job,
I never went anywhere on
Well, it picked up the Liberty Party from the pier, took them into the YMCA, dumped them out, come back to the pier and waited on the next group.
Oh,
And then about the time Liberty was up, I'd go into the YMCA and wait the guys off the ship, bring them back down to the dock. My last trip from there was midnight, come back into the pier, and I'd park the vehicle and get in the boat, go back to the ship, and in the morning start out all over again.
I bet you had some interesting experiences going after those guys after Liberty.
I got a little story. This is before Pearl Harbor. First, we had a baseball team there, and our division officer, which was J.L. Peters, he was the guy in charge. He was the coach, manager, and he had a ditty bag, you know, canvas bag, so big. He carried a baseball in. So after the season was over, he gave me that bag to wash and clean up, you know. So I took it and I threw it in with the regular ship's laundry. So I come back, I take it up to him, he looks at it. And I said, "Don't look too clean, you better go wash it again." So I take it and I take it back to my locker, I throw it in my locker, kind of forget about it. And I don't know how long or later he asked me about it, so I go to my locker and get it, and I give it to him. He says, "Well, that looks better now." It must have been them cockroaches that washed it, because we had plenty of them.
How funny.
And then another time, we was working down there, down where our bunks were and that. I was on a step ladder working on something on the overhead, and this other guy, Berg is the name, and he says something about, in the Navy there's always two ways to do things, you know. And I says, "How is that, the right way and Pete's way?" As Peter's, and I looked down, here's Pete. He didn't say nothing at that time, but the way I knew he heard what I said.
Yeah, there's a lot of good times and bad times.
How old were you when you went in?
19.
How about you, George?
I was 20, I went in Great Lakes and celebrated my 21st birthday up at Great Lakes. I'm in the Waukegan, I guess.
And what age was it when you left
When I left where?
the service?
Oh, that was 20 years later.
20 years later. How about you, George?
Well, I got out in 46, which is 8 years. I shipped over up in Kodiak, Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got called back during the Korean War. We put the Wisconsin back in commission.
Mm-hmm.
And they had changed my rate. First I went through IC school down in Washington, D.C. There was chief electrician's mate. Well, if you graduated, you made chief. I was first class when I got. So then, after I was in I was in the reserves, and so then they changed my rate to ICC. It was Interior Communications Chief. I figure that's one of the reasons. Of course, I was in the reserves. That's why I got called back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was a fireman first class aboard the Utah when she was sunk in 1941, and I had the mid-watch the night before, and woke up very suddenly to several loud explosions, and the second one got my attention, and I got out of there. Didn't hear anything, the lights were out, the loss of steam, and we just abandoned ship, and after we got ashore, we went in the sewer trench and stayed with the rest of the fellows and watched the war from a vantage point where it was safe. We could watch the planes as they came over, and we could watch the ship sink and watch the midget submarine and quite a few other things. Basically, that's it.
How old were you when you Whitney?
I was 18. I just turned 18 when the war started. And I had been in the boiler division about 6 months, and didn't do much. That was about it.
And you really saw a midget submarine?
Oh yeah, the one that they sunk, the Monaghan sunk it. For all those years, we thought that the Monaghan had rammed it. I was talking to a guy on the Pearl Harbor Survivors amateur radio net, and he said no, that they didn't ram it. They just bumped and slid alongside, and they dropped a couple of depth charges, and they depth charged it in the harbor, which is unusual. It's shallow water, and it threw mud and debris about 100 to 300 feet in the air. I'm not really sure. It's hard to recall, but that was so long ago. But it was a lot of silt and things in the air, and sunk. And sometime after the war, perhaps 10 years later or so, they raised that midget submarine, and I think they put it in new construction over in 1010 Dock. Not sure of that. That's about it.
And what did you do after you left the Utah?
I went with the rest of the fellows aboard the Argonne, and after the Argonne, I went aboard the Detroit and spent the next 4 years, and was at the Detroit at Tokyo Bay September the 2nd, and belonged to a unique organization. You had to be at Pearl Harbor Survivor December the 7th, and you had to be at Tokyo Bay September the 2nd, and we have an organization. I think we have about 60 or 80 people that were located. You could find a lot of people that were one place or the other, but very few that were both. So I keep saying I'm finished.
The two left alive that worked where?
That were in the duty section in the fire rooms. Leonard Purefoy and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And Leonard Purefoy was the last one to see Peter Tomich alive, and John Crane. John Crane was his fireman. And I had the midwatch. I was a fireman on the midwatch, and John Crane was a fireman on the 8 to 12. And they had just relieved the 4 to 8, in other words. Mm-hmm. And so he was somewhere down below, and Purefoy couldn't help him because the steam and the smoke or whatever was from the explosions. And as a result, all he did was close the quick closing oil valve and left, and there was nothing else done. The boilers weren't secured. They lost steam pressure, dropped immediately, and so the only thing that he could do was close the quick closing valve and leave. Right. And he said, in this, he said that he saw Peter Tomich going down the starboard air castle. They refer to the air locker as an air castle, and he saw him going down as he came up, and he had a different version before, but that was a later version, so that's the one I put in there. That's all again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and how did you get off the Utah?
That's another interesting story. There are a lot of guys that claim that they were last men off, but the last man off actually was a guy by the name of Peters, and when I left the ship, as I was coming up this was the starboard air castle. The guys were all in it. They were stopped. No one knew what to do, and there was a big husky chief machinist mate, and he just cleared. They called him a companionway. They referred to him a companionway because one ladder went up and one ladder went down, and he cleared it so we could walk up. And when he did that, then I got topside, and by that time the ship had rolled where you had to almost climb up over the side to get on the bottom, which was rapidly becoming the top. Right. And I was on her till she rolled completely over, and most everyone was gone. They're just observing everything. I was too young to know what was going on. Wasn't afraid, and this chief warrant electrician, and so when I decided I better go, the planes came over and they started shooting at us again. And I decided it's time to get out of there, so I left and slid down, and the ship was completely upside down. And I looked back, and I happened to think about how heavy he was. And guys later said he weighed about 300 pounds. I'm not real sure, but he was huge. And I could think of him crashing down like an elephant coming down. And so I swam like crazy to get out of the way. And he, as far as I know, was the last man off. But several people that I do recall each said that they were, in fact, the last man off. But they can't all be. But the last man stories are pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. How interesting.
when I left the Argonne, Commander Steele came down and said to all the guys from Utah, follow him. Went to the receiving station, and we were volunteered for the Detroit and several other ships. And I went aboard the Detroit and stayed aboard her for the remainder of the war, and she made the Aleutian campaigns after Pearl Harbor, and then she up in Paramashuro and the Kuril Islands, and then later she went into the Philippines and Ulithi and Okinawa and Iwo Jima, and then on to Tokyo Bay, basically. In other words, she made the whole war. And I was on her about a little over 4 years in upstate New York in Utica. And I got on a bus, and I had my uniform on. We had to wear our dress uniform, of course, as a recruiter. And this lady kept looking at me, and I didn't know what was wrong. And she told me, she said she just couldn't understand why a fine young man like me was back in the States and her son was out in Korea. And there was no way I could explain to her that I was a Navy recruiter, and the Navy decided they didn't want me in Korea. So, but that happened at that particular juncture.
So you were in 22 years?
Yes.
And then reserve for 30 years?
The Fleet Reserve, yeah. Well, the Fleet Reserve for 8 years. 8 years. Until you have your full 30, and that's just the way that, I don't know what they do now, but that's what the Navy did at the time. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was on 9 ships. I was on when they were showing the picture of the Missouri. Mm-hmm. I was on the Iowa, and Missouri is an Iowa class battleship. The Iowa is BB-61, the Missouri is BB-63. I served on the Atlanta, and I was on 3 destroyers, the Goodrich, the Beatty, the Bordelon. I was on the Valcor AVP-55. Let's see, I was on the Bladen. I probably was on, but 9 of them were actually served aboard. Others I wasn't aboard very long.
What was the most fearful moment you remember?
A few years ago when we had a lightning storm, and the transformer about 75 feet from our house, the lightning struck it, and the only flashback I ever had, we had a little dog and my wife, and I was telling my wife, I said, abandon ship, let's get the hell out of here. And she didn't, of course, didn't know what was happening, and that's probably the most fearful moment I had. When it happened before aboard ship, I was too young, it didn't bother me. But this time, I guess I had a flashback, and that probably was my most fearful moment, believe it or not.
How interesting.
And my wife said, what are you talking about? Of course, the lights were all out.
Name or what they call me?
What they call you.
Okay.
And then just tell us what you remember about Pearl Harbor. Just talk. Just have fun.
Well, anyway, I was there.
That's good enough. Go ahead. He's ready.
Well, I was assigned to the USS Utah in Long Beach. And anyway, they said the ship never goes anywhere. But the next day we were underway. And we went to Hawaii. And we reported to Mr. Peters. He was the chief electrician on the ship, 4 of us. That we report for duty, and he says he didn't need any help. That was our welcome. So anyway, he'd sent us to the chief, and they found things for us to do. But anyway, on December 7th, that's the part you're interested in, isn't it? Okay. I had just relieved the watch. The guy's name was Joe Barta. And he told me, he says, the crane is to be activated at 8 o'clock, which it's on the internet, all this stuff too, you know. Well, anyway, to be activated at 8, and he says, they will call you when you activate the switch to take the lumber off the ship. And also there was emergency kits, canvas bags with flashlights, fuse pullers, fuses, and rubber gloves, all what an electrician would need. So he says, put new batteries in all the flashlights. And that's what I was doing when the torpedo hit. And the blisters started filling with water,
and I start pulling out the power switches. The crane never got activated, but the ventilation and the galley and, you know, all that stuff, that was all. So the lights would stay on, but it didn't stay long. Then I worked my way through the amplifying room down to the dynamo room with my flashlight in hand, and there was the hatch to the bilge, and the wrench that opens the nuts that hold it were there by luck. So I opened it up, and I was in a snowstorm of asbestos. And I crawled into the bilges, and I worked my way, and with this wrench, I kept it with me, kept tapping the bottom to hear a hollow sound. Well, nothing for quite a while. So then Mr. Samansky, he was a machinist, warrant machinist on the ship, and his chief, Terry McAllen, they says, well, we got to see what we can do. So they went to the Tangier, which is a ship next to us, wasn't bothered. And they says, we'd like some equipment. We got somebody trapped in the ship. We want to burn a hole and so forth. They turned them down. So then they says, well, let's go to the Raleigh. They're in bad shape. They were hit pretty bad. So this is the difference in people. So they said, well, sure, what do you need? And we'll send a crew over to do it. So that's what they did. They burned a hole and pulled me out, and I was the last one on the ship to get off of the ship in that fashion after it was upside down.
So you were trapped,
I was trapped.
and you were banging with that wrench.
Yeah, up. I went up to the bottom. Does that make sense?
Yes, because it's upside down now, right?
Yeah, it was up.
And you went up to the
Right
bottom.
now, it is partially righted, not all the way.
And so you were tapping on the bottom of the ship.
I was on the bottom of the ship.
And they heard you, and
Yeah, and I had heard the stories for years. It's almost rusted through and all like that, but it was over an inch thick.
it was over an inch thick.
Well, anyway, the crew from the Raleigh, and I've met everyone but two of them. Of course, one was killed in the war, and the other one never could make contact. Dishes away. Does that give you an idea?
Okay, so around noon.
1 o'clock maybe? 11, 12:30? I don't know. Nobody's watch worked. We didn't know.
You were in there 4 or 5 hours.
About that, yeah. So then, our chief engineer, Solomon Isquith, he went over to see the admiral and told him, he says, you know, the Oklahoma is overturned. And he says, what are you doing about that? He says, well, I'm preoccupied, he says, gun emplacements and all those kind of things. So anyhow, they call Boys Town, that's where the yard work, a lot of the yard workmen lived. And they wanted volunteers, especially those who could work torches and cutting metal. So they went over, and I've heard different numbers, but either 28 or 32 were rescued from the Oklahoma.
That was after you had been rescued.
Yeah, after. They gave him the idea. Of course, he was a commander, and he could get transportation easier than I could.
You were in, where were you? In,
We were off of Okinawa.
right.
Yeah, anyway, on the USS Ainsworth DD 700. Well, we escorted the Hancock, the carrier at that time. And we got hit by the kamikazes, killed all the radiomen and the gun crew above the radio room. And this new kid aboard ship, just out of radio school, I suppose, and he was in the emergency radio room. And he got the message the commander-in-chief was dead, or deceased, or however they want to word it. And he brought the news up to the captain, and the captain says, "Do you know code?" He said, "Yes, I do. I learned it." So he says, "You go back and confirm this." That's the day Roosevelt had died. It was a day different there because of the dateline.
Yes, well, okay, on December the 7th, I was on the baseball team, and I was looking out the porthole, observing the clouds to see what kind of weather we might have during the day. But about that time, I looked at Fort Island and saw smoke coming up, and looked up in the sky, and there was Japanese planes bombing Fort Island. Well, from there, about that time, torpedo hit the port side of our ship, and we all knew something drastic had happened. So somewhere along there, the gunnery officer came by and said, "Come with me, let's go down below and check watertight doors." Down we went, and we seen everything was secured. We also saw water coming down the passageway. And he says, "Well, we better get out of here." So up 2 flights of stairs. And the next set of stairs, why, the guys was standing on the stairs, the stairway. And I needed to get out because the ship was listing probably 30 or 35 degrees at that time, and I was quite frustrated because I knew something bad was going to happen real soon. Not knowing that they were standing there, because when they left the ladder, they would be exposed to machine gun fire. So finally the ladder was cleared, and the ship was really listing by that time, and I had about 40 feet to go out, get off the ship, and I hit the deck running. But I noticed gangways and fenders and boat materials. It was breaking loose from the side of the ship, and I jumped up and grabbed the beam on the overhead so the stuff could fall beneath my feet. At that time, the water pushed me up against the overhead, and I had about 15 or 20 feet to swim to be in the open. So I started swimming, and when I estimated I was 15 or 20 feet, I came up, and I came up in the open with crude oil all over my hair and face and eyes. So then I was picked up by one of our boats and put ashore. And from that time on, I was sent to the dispensary to get my face cleaned up, my eyes washed, and so let me see. Then we started assembling machine guns for somewhere. They brought out, wanted to know if we could assemble machine guns, and so I was a gunner's mate, and that was right down my line, and we got a assembly line going, and ammunition belts ready, and so the guns and the ammunition went out. So after that time, I was returned to the Vestful, one of the Base Force ships for food and bunking at night. I guess that's about ends the experience for that day.
Don't forget who it is.
Okay. My name is James W. Clark. I live in McAllen, Virginia, and I was a gunner's mate 2nd class at that time. And I was wearing the phones, and word came down, unidentified planes approaching. So shortly, they changed it, said, friendly planes, do not fire. And that was a chatter all this time the plane was coming in. So do not fire, do not fire. And so from the next thing I knew, I saw, I heard machine gun fire, and noticed across the bay off the California, they was firing at this plane. Evidently some gun station weren't connected with phones or something. But anyhow, those tracer bullets, you could see them very close to us. So I touched my partner and told him to hit the deck, and we laid down for shortly till most of the firing was over.
And this was the night of December the 7th.
Correct. So then after got off a watch, I went down, had a bunk, and got a few hours sleep. The next morning, general quarters sounded, and there was planes from the States coming in early in the morning, and they identified them right away. They were B-17s, I believe. So didn't get much sleep that night. That's about all I can tell you right now.
Not anything.
I'm William Hughes. I was a radioman 3rd class aboard the USS Utah at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. I had been in the Navy about a year and a half. I had been aboard Utah 11 months when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It happened very rapidly, very suddenly. I was sleeping below decks, the people around me, and I had no idea what had happened. Our initial thoughts were that we had been rammed by another ship in the harbor because of the explosion and the movement of the ship. It just was a very unnerving experience. I was sleeping on a cot near main radio room, 2 decks down. We were all sitting up in our bunks saying what's happened, and someone came in and said we've been rammed. A second torpedo hit within another minute perhaps, or even less, and the ship immediately started listing. And it was pretty obvious that we needed to get topside and see what was going on. So just as rapidly as we could scamper up the hatches, through the hatches, up the ladders, we reached the topside and congregated in a metal-covered area called an air castle that gave us some protection from Japanese planes who were coming over. After torpedoing us, they were coming back and strafing anyone and anything. And the ship, the Utah, actually sank, probably first ship to sink in Pearl Harbor, within 10 minutes. We had falling timber on our decks, and I understand this caused the deaths of many people. Like most everyone, I escaped by jumping over the port side of the ship. The ship was rolling to the, I jumped over the starboard side of the ship. The ship was capsizing to port at the left side. And there were 2 problems with jumping off that ship at that time. The Japanese were coming over and strafing you if you went out in the open, which you had to do to abandon the ship. And there was a danger that you would jump on someone or someone would jump on you. Looking around and seeing what was happening, it became apparent that I needed to remove myself from the USS Utah, which I did by jumping overboard. No one jumped on me, I jumped on no one. I swam the ship to the pilings to which we had been moored, tied to with ropes, which was already breaking as the ship began to capsize. And it was easy to sink down and lower yourself into the water and hide behind the pilings when the strafing planes came over. When there was a lull in the strafing, I and the rest of the troops, virtually all of them, swam for the beach and hid in a ditch that had been dug by, I think it was the WPA, for a pipeline. Now, some people went over the wrong side of the ship. They were crushed by timbers. Others waited too long to leave, and they were hurt as they slid down the side of a barnacle ship. But overall, about 500 of us gathered in that ditch. We were huddled, hearing rumors as to how the Japanese were invading the island. And of course we knew it was the Japanese because we really had a ringside seat to watch what happened after that. We were very apprehensive about what was happening on the other side of the island. The explosions were tremendous. They were of a low frequency sound, very powerful, and black smoke was clouding the skies. And we had no way of knowing at that time that the Arizona had exploded. We were there approximately an hour and 45 minutes, and we were moved to the Naval Air Station, some buildings that were unharmed. We were given uniforms. We were still wet, had no shoes. And eventually we would be put on a truck and transported to a motor launch which would carry us to what was called a 1010 dock area and be put aboard the USS Argonne, which was our base force flagship, our mothership, so to speak. So it would be on the Argonne that we would spend the rest of the afternoon and into the evening, when one of our midst, a man named Palace Brown, was killed by a stray bullet. And here's a guy who had survived the sinking of the USS Utah, only to be killed by one of ours. Anyway, it was quite an evening. We handled ammunition coming up out of the ship that was being transported to God knows where. And the next day, I was transferred to a seagoing minesweeper for temporary duty in the harbor, while their radioman was in the hospital. He had shrapnel from the attack. So a week later, I found myself assigned to the USS Saratoga aircraft carrier and headed for the war. So from Pearl Harbor on December 7th to February, when the Saratoga was torpedoed, I had quite an introduction to war. Saratoga, of course, did not sink, fortunately, and was the only American aircraft carrier that was in commission at the start of the war to go through the entire war. Ironically, we destroyed the Saratoga at the atomic bomb experiments on Bikini Island after the war. So we had some tough going in 1942, and for 3 years, 8 months and 25 days, you hoped to get back to the States when you could, and you hoped to survive, which we did.
You were at Midway?
No, I was not at Midway.
You were not on the Saratoga?
No, I have been transferred from the Saratoga when it returned to Pearl Harbor in February after being torpedoed near Johnston Island. I was transferred to other ships. I participated in an invasion of several islands, retaking, including the islands in Alaska, Attu, Adak, and Kiska. Although Kiska was and Adak were unopposed, the Japs had left. At any point, I was sure that I wouldn't survive the war, and to be sitting here talking to you now, nearly 59 years later, is nothing but a miracle.
And what age were you when you went into the Navy?
I was a teenager, and I matured, hopefully, very quickly.
You matured very quickly, didn't you? And you were in the Navy for how long?
22 years.
Oh, you were